3, 2, I'm so scared. I'm so scared right now. 3, 2. Good morning, HFC kids. We're so pumped to have you back for another week learning about the story of Joseph. And this week's story is kind of intense. It gets your heart racing. It shows that Joseph is under pressure. So Blake came to help me do a game where our hearts are going to be beating really quickly and we're going to be under pressure. We're going to be racing against the timer. We're going to have 6 minutes to see if we can name all 50 states. And neither one of us learned a song or anything, so we just have to go by memory and see if we can remember all 50 states. And maybe you can do it. Maybe you can do it faster than we can. But this is how we're doing our race against the clock. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, 6 minutes starts now. So, time was up, and we each got 48 states. We missed 2 each before time ran out.
Those New England states.
So that's our competition, and you guys can have your own little version of competition, whether you're doing this or whether you're saying whoever can list 20 words that start with the letter B, or like who can do 25 push-ups the fastest. Whatever. If you do the words that start with B, I will let you use Bobby, our cameraman. His name's Bobby. You can use that as one of your B words if that's the way you want to go. There's your little cheat. So now we're going to talk about how Joseph in our story this week was under pressure and his heart was racing in this really crazy time in the story of Joseph. So we'll get right through to that. So as we talk about being under pressure and dealing with these different high pressure situations, if you stay tuned to the end, we're going to do a more fun experiment. I'm so scared. I'm so scared right now. That has to do with pressure. But our story this week is about how Joseph was under pressure when he was brought before the Pharaoh. And if you remember, the Pharaoh is kind of like the king. He was in charge. He was the ruler of all of Egypt. And he was a really powerful man, even more powerful than Potiphar was in our previous stories. And our first week, we talked about how Joseph had these crazy dreams that made it seem like his brothers were going to end up bowing down to him. And then we found out that he was put in prison and he was able to start interpreting people's dreams. And he interpreted the dream for the cupbearer and for the baker. And they ended up coming true. So this week we're talking about how 2 years later, he was brought before the Pharaoh to talk about the Pharaoh's dreams. And if you remember from last week, the cupbearer, he told the cupbearer, when you leave and you go back to Pharaoh, tell him who I am and that I follow God and that I can interpret dreams. So that way, when Pharaoh was having these dreams, he knew 2 years later to go back to Joseph and ask Joseph to interpret his dreams for him. So we're in Genesis chapter 41 today, and I'm going to help illustrate some of these dreams that Pharaoh was having. So this week, like I said, we're in Genesis chapter 41, and I'm going to start reading in verse 14. It says, when Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, they quickly brought him out of the pit, and when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. And Joseph said, listen to this, he said to the Pharaoh, it is not in me, but God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. So even then, in this really scary time that he's brought before the king, the Pharaoh, he's still trusting in God. He's trusting in God, even in these high pressure situations. And it says that Pharaoh began to describe his dream. I'm going to draw to illustrate, he ends up having 2 dreams. And his first dream is about 2 cows. and he says that, well, not 2 cows, 2 kinds of cows. There were 7 cows that were big and fat, and this is my big fat cow. There's a big cow. It doesn't really look like a cow, but this is the big fat cow, and it was healthy, and it was strong, and it was great. And then there were 7 of them, and then later something happened, and there were skinny cows. This is my skinny cow. He's not as cool. And the skinny cow was disgusting and not as good, and they couldn't use it anymore. And he said that was his first one. His first dream was they were by the river, and there were 7 healthy cows that were big and strong and fat, and then there were 7 skinny cows that weren't so great. And the skinny cow was not a good thing, and the fat cow was definitely a good thing. And then he said that he had a second dream. After that, he had a second dream where there were 7 grains of wheat. I also can't draw grains of wheat quickly, so we're just going to use this. There were 7 good grains of wheat growing, and they were beautiful, and they were a great harvest. And then there were 7 bad wheat. 7 bad kinds of wheat that they couldn't use, that was broken and disheveled and not of any good to the people in Egypt. And he didn't know what this dream meant. And he had 2 of them, and they were very similar. There was the 7 cows, and then the 7 bad cows, and then the 7 good ears, and the 7 bad ears. So he was like, this has got to mean something. Someone tell me what this means. So that's why he brought Joseph. And now I'm going to go down to Genesis 41:28. And it says, "It is as I told Pharaoh," this is Joseph talking, "God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will be 7 years of great plenty in all the land of Egypt. But after that, there will be 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will consume the land. It will be very severe." So he ends up saying, right before this, he says that the 7 good cows are the 7 years of healthy livestock. They're going to have 7 years of great times in their kingdom, and then they're going to have 7 years where the animals aren't doing so well, and they're not able to use them for meat, and they're not going to be strong, and they're not going to be able to have the animals to eat anymore. And then he also says that the 7 good harvests mean there's going to be 7 years of harvest. And those 7 years are going to be wonderful, but then they're going to be overshadowed. The people are going to forget how good they are, because as soon as those 7 years are over, there's going to be 7 years of no grain, of broken grain, of famine, of everything just going wrong. And he says the people are going to forget how good they had it, because they're going to be so stuck in those 7 terrible years. And it says in verse 32, "The doubling of Pharaoh's dream," the fact that there are 2 of them, mean that this is fixed by God, and God will be the one to bring it about. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. So he says, Joseph says, not only is this going to happen, but you're going to have to do something about it. And my suggestion is get someone who's wise and is following someone that you trust, someone who's trusting and good, and put them in charge of those 7 years of good and the 7 years of famine, so that when all of that happens, the people aren't going to starve in the 7 years, or they're not going to get too greedy during their 7 years of goodness. And it says in verse 33, "Let Pharaoh select the discerning and wise man and set him over Egypt." And if you move down to verse 39, it says, "Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'Since God has shown you all of this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are.'" So because the Pharaoh saw that Joseph was trusting in God in these dreams and his wisdom and his peace, and he wasn't even it doesn't even say that he was that nervous going before the Pharaoh, because he was trusting that God was with him, even under all of that pressure. He said, if you can do that well under pressure and you're that wise, and I know that you trust your God, I'm going to put you in charge. It says, "Only in regards to the throne will I be greater than you. And you will be in charge of everything." Joseph was going to be in charge. It says, "Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand and clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck and made him ride in the second chariot. So he dolled him all up, make him look like a king. Joseph was getting the best deal here. He's been in prison and now he's been cleaned up. He's been given new clothes and now he's been given power over Egypt. It says in verse 43, they called out before him, bow the knee. Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. That's crazy to me, that Joseph went from being just a prisoner that was trusting in God to someone who trusted God through a high pressure situation. And because of that trust, God put him into a position of power. It said that people were bowing to him. And if you remember, in our first week we were talking about Joseph. And do you remember what Joseph had when he was a boy, when he was like a teenager? He had crazy dreams. And some of them were about similar things to the Pharaoh's dreams. And it said that Joseph was going to be the ruler of many, and people were going to be bowing to him. And when he had interpreted dreams in the past, like in the cupbearer or the baker, those had come true. Here we see that Joseph's dream is also coming true. In verse 43, it says that people are bowing to him, and he has been set over all the land of Egypt. Now, the end of Joseph's dream when he was a teenager said that his brothers were going to bow before him as well. That's not really happening yet. So we'll have to tune in next week to see what happens when Joseph is in this huge place of power. So this week, as we've been talking about Joseph trusting in God, we saw that he was trusting in God even in these high pressure situations. He knew that God could teach him about Pharaoh's dreams. And I don't know if you've ever been in a high pressure situation like this, that you feel like you have to rely on God and God is having to be the one that speaks for you or through you. Joseph couldn't have interpreted those dreams that we see later come true without God's special power. And there are times in your life that you might think that you can't do things without God's special power. If you talk to your parents, there are probably times in their life that they can look back and say, I wouldn't have been able to do that without God. I have a prayer journal, and it's where I write down things that I'm thankful for and things that I'm praying for. And sometimes it's really helpful to look back on those things that I'm thankful for, because I can get really sad and I say I'm thankful for my church, or I'm thankful for the beautiful outdoors, or for my home, or for food. And those things help me remember that God has blessed me, even if I'm upset about things. But then I also write things that I'm praying about, such as I might be praying for my friend to get a job that she's looking for. And I write that down and I say, Lord, I'm praying for my friend Natalie as she's applying for this job. And then later I can look back after Natalie has gotten the job and see that I prayed for that and God answered my prayer. And that helps me remember the power of God. So this week, I would suggest for you to write down your own prayers of thankfulness and your own prayers asking for things for God, asking for Him to remind you to be thankful. And maybe you're praying for your grandma who's hurt, or for someone who's sick, or for patience during this quarantine. And I've given some of you all index cards. There should be one for each of you, or you can grab a piece of paper if you don't have index cards and write down some of those things that you're thankful for. Write down some of those things that you're praying about. And sometimes seeing those can help you trust God in the work that He's doing in your life. And I also enclosed envelopes. If you want to send a letter to the church, if you want us to be praying for things, those envelopes should already have an address on them. If not, then we'll put the address in the description here. And you can write those and send those into the church, and we'll pray for you here. Are you nervous? Are you stressed? Do you feel like you're in a high pressure situation for school? Maybe you're not sure if you're going to pass third grade. Maybe you're not sure if you're going to love your new baby little sister or brother. I don't know, maybe you need God's help through those things. If you need those and you need people to help pray for you, we're willing to help you with that. So you can mail those in. But I suggest you, even as a family, to write down things you're thankful for and things that you're praying for. And that's just something that you can do from home this week to help reinforce your lesson, that even in those high pressure situations, you can trust in God. So that's it for this week. We will see you next week. I encourage you to... It's Bobby. I'm recording right now.
Hey, we're all ready for your experiment outside.
Oh, our experiment. I almost forgot. I was just closing out and telling them that I'd see them next week, but we want to do that first?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
All right. You're all ready to go?
Let's do that.
Okay, I'll be right out. Okay, so this week we're talking about pressure, and nothing is better to show pressure than Mentos and Coke. So here we go. Are you ready? 3, 2, I'm so scared. I'm so scared right now. 3, 2. One. It worked! I did it! Got my gum. This experiment worked. Look at how that's gone. We will see you next week, HFC kids. Bye.